I'm Nick Westall. I'm a business technologist and exec coach who's building high-performing teams and relationships to deliver accelerated value for the companies that I've worked with. I've been in the tech industry for over 30 years, helping tech businesses achieve grand ambitions, rescues, mergers and acquisitions, and created many managed service organizations through the companies that I've been with. Alongside that, I've been an exec coach for over 15 years, originally in competitive paddle sports, but then mentoring Open University MBA graduates. And then through word of mouth, expanded out to across all industries, from CXOs all the way down through to team leads. It's been quite a journey for the last 15 years. Often that's been focused on career transitions, but also leadership problems and specific issues that they've been looking after at that time and been responsible for. I'm also a married father of 3. I enjoy Carnicross, running with my pooches across the hills around the local area. And I'm also a member of 2 public speaking clubs through Toastmasters. One of those is Excalibur Speakers. It's based in London, an in-person meeting. And I've been with them for about 9.5 years now, and achieved their Distinguished Toastmasters Award, which is the highest award that they can give out. And really, it means that you've been working on excellence in public speaking and leadership, and helping others in achieving that and growing themselves. As of late, I've been an interim CXO, working under my own service company, Protagonist Tech, focusing around mergers and acquisitions, transformations, rescues, and advisory work strategy. Also following through on the exec coaching side, I do a lot of mentoring, a lot of pitch doctoring, whether that's for investors, helping organizations get more money, but also helping them close more deals. And I'm also a speaker. Today, we're going to be looking at a particular model that allows you to generate greater self-awareness, then adapting what you found from that awareness, bringing some extra maturity to the way in which you're able to operate, and you're able to help others operate and therefore drive performance, both your own performance, but also those of your team and those that you work with, whether they're your customers or other people within other organizations or your own organization. First of all, though, I'd like to understand what you'd like to get from today's session. So if you can click on the Slido link there and sign in, and maybe take a moment or two just to drop in the top thing that you'd like to see from today's session. So we've got a few coming in. How to be more effective in conflict situations, ways to be positively manage tricky stakeholders within the moment. More tactics, particularly working with founders who struggle with change. Yes, they definitely do. Trying to instigate lots of it themselves, but really don't like it being thrown back at them. Conflicts with CEOs. Yes, there's interesting ones with those. Unpack what's happened to me recently and see if I could handle it differently. We'll try and deal with that in the Q&A at the end. If we don't quite get a chance, I'm more than happy to pick up afterwards as well. Aggression in large groups, influence over peers and direct reports, techniques to work with CEO founders who constantly pivot and cause conflict. Okay, I think we've got a pretty good selection there. And we'll try and touch on those as we go through. If I don't manage to actually deal with your specific request, then give me a shout afterwards and we can pick that up. So what's the problem that we're dealing with? Well, quite often we found that the people and they don't necessarily know why sometimes, the communications with other people within the organization, whether it's their own team or the wider company, or indeed some of their customers, it just breaks down and you end up with conflict. And it's very hard to bridge that gap once that conflict has opened up. It can lead to a vast amount of frustration, not really about not being understood yourself, but equally not necessarily understanding what it is that the other person is so frustrated about themselves. It's hard. It can be a struggle to motivate people in that area, and it can lead into a downward spiral. And it can be very hard to inspire your direct reports, the people in your team, if you're getting into this problem. And sometimes it can be individuals, but equally it could be the wider group. You could find also that people just have a completely different perspective on an item for you, and you don't necessarily understand why they have that perspective, or equally why they've adopted the perspective that they have as well. It can provide confusion, and whether it's with their words or indeed their actions. What you can find off the back of this malaise, though, is that performance drops, whether it's your own performance or whether it's that of the team or the organization. And quite often that can get to the point where it leaches into customer environments and your partners. And you can rarely get that performance back without actual intervention or providing direct support. So first of all, I'd like to tell you a story. And it's about in the morning, you're going to work, you're at the bottom of a nice big building, so you're actually at work, and you're waiting for the lift. You've hit the button, and the door opens, and just as you're going in, this bloke on a phone is tapping away, shoulders you out of the way, gets into the lift, hits the button, doors close, and off he disappears. It's a very rude man. So you wait for the next lift to come along, and you've hit the button and you've gone in, and you've just hit the floor that you wanted, and the doors are starting to close. This chap jumps forward, puts his hand in the door, holds the door open and goes, "Oh, this is fantastic. Come on, there's loads of room in here," and starts waving lots of people in. "Come on, we can get loads of people in here. Did you know that there's a bar on the top floor on the roof? We could go there at lunchtime. They do fantastic food, maybe have a drink. It'll be absolutely wonderful." Also, that following day, there's someone else that joins the queue, and you notice them. The queue's quite long that day, and there's a queue for each of the lifts that are there. And you see this chap, and he seems to be quite hesitant. He's talking with the people around him, seems to be getting on really well. But you can see he's watching the queues, and you can see the other queues are moving quite fast, but he never quite makes the jump to move across to those queues. Finally, he gives in and he jumps across only to find the queue that he was in, suddenly rushes forward, and he misses his chance. So he finds it really hard to make decisions and choices, but gets on very well with the people around him. Then you find the following morning, you're in a lift, and the lift is absolutely stacked. It's standing room only. You can hardly breathe. And then this chap at the back sort of looks out, counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It looks like there are 14 people in this lift. It is only rated for 13. You get out. Now, these are the 4 different types of personality that you can find out there, or behavioral profile, the way in which people behave, which makes up a part of their personality. So what I'd like to know is, which one are you? Are you the rude man on the phone who just barges people out of the way? Are you the happy party guy who wants to go for a liquid lunch, the indecisive talker, or the head counter that wants to eject you from the lift? We seem to be quite binary today. Cool. No, it looks like we've got that at all. So we've got no rude phone man that's completely focused on what they're doing, no head counters. So it seems that we've got a very social bunch in today, which is absolutely fantastic, which is no great surprise if you signed up to a lunch and learn session, I suppose. Well, you could have some quite entertaining parts for the high C's and high D's that are out there, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. But the high D's, the highly demanding people, are maybe a bit like this chap who's played by Simon Bateman in American Psycho. And he's probably the epitome of maybe some of those CEO and founder comments that we came from, why people want to find out, why do these people act in such an extreme way? And the reality is that you may think they're psycho, but actually in reality, they're just highly demanding people, and they have specific characteristics around them. In fact, each of those 4 pillars have different characteristics, and we're going to go through and understand how we can use those and then adapt those behaviors so that we can use them to our benefit and hopefully the benefit of those people that are around you. So what's the solution? Well, actually, it's a simple model that helps you deliver increasing performance. And the first stage of that is all about awareness of your own style and other people's styles around you. but also then being able to take that information and adapt your behavior, help others adapt their own behavior around them. Similarly, being able to adapt their emotional intelligence and their own way in which they view the world and deal with their own emotions and other people's around them, but also the way in which they communicate, the way in which they speak with others, the way in which they write messages, and the way in which they move their body and they interact with people. What it does, though, is it creates a virtuous circle that helps increase both your own performance, but equally those of the team that are around you. But there's one specific thing that underlines all of this, and that's the relationship behavior and communication. Your style of behavior directly reflects your style of communication and how you interact with the people that are around you. And there's one particular book that's out there, which is called Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson. And this is on the very first page of that book. And it's about communication happens on the listener's terms. So communication is what the listener does. And specifically, it's all that the person can interpret what you want to convey in a totally different way than intended. So you say it one way, they hear something completely different. So being very clear about what you say and how you say it and how it's communicated can be really quite important. Now, Surrounded by Idiots has a particular model within it, which is these 4 separate pillars. And actually, it is a straight reflection, though got around the copyright nicely, of the DISC format. And that's the model that I'm going to focus on today, that allows you to build up both the self-awareness and the team awareness of others that you've got around you, so that you can use it to your benefit and to the benefit of the organization. Now, the DISC is an acronym. It's around demanding, influencing, steadiness, and conscientious. So that chap in the lift on his phone that budged you out of the way is a demanding person. The party guy who wanted to go for a liquid lunch, influencing and highly gregarious. Particularly, there's also steadiness as well. Someone who is highly focused around people and quite resistant to change, particularly if it's going to be to the detriment of the people around them. And then the highly conscientious, that chap who is counting all of the heads in the lift and asks someone to get out. They want to understand all of the detail in all of the flavors and all of the colors, and understand all of the options before they actually will make a decision. And there are 2 main dimensions that are used around DISC to actually break these down, so you can understand what these people are and how they operate. And the first of them is how they interact with the environment. And it's whether they perceive themselves to be more powerful than the environment they're in, or whether they're less powerful, i.e. the environment affects them instead of them affecting it. And whether they believe that generally the environment is a good place to be, or whether it's a demanding, challenging place to be. And you can see the D, the I, the S, and the C there. So the D and the I believe that they're more powerful than the environment. They can bring about change and make it happen. Whereas those that are high S's and high C's perceive that they're less strong than the environment, and therefore they find it harder to bring about change in their default state. We also find that whether the environment is how they perceive it, so the I's and the S's generally see the world in a positive light, whereas the demanding and the conscientious people see the environment as unfavorable and challenging. But and you may get a flavor for this. The high D's feel that actually it might be challenging, but I can do something about it. I will make it happen. Whereas the high C's don't feel that necessary level of confidence, and they'll break down back into detail. Another area is the breakdown of the general tendencies of the people that fall into each of these areas. So high D's, high I's, again, active, fast-paced, assertive, bold people, brash. Quite often this will come across as being extroverted as well, whereas the C's and the S's at the bottom there are thoughtful, moderate pace, calm, they're careful, very considered usually in terms of what they're doing and how they're going to do it. And sometimes in extreme cases, this can come over as being really quite introverted. D's and C's, very much asking questions, logic focused. Logic is a very key tenet, particularly for high C's. They want facts and figures and hard decisions to make. And they like to be challenging and to be challenged. Whereas I's and S's are far more accepting about what's going on around them, people focused, receptive, and agreeable. So that high bit about people is really key. Now, this DISC model comes from Wiley. They own the copyright to DISC. So pretty much all other DISC models are actually based off this core one. And some of the information, these screenshots that you can see here, are actually taken from their DISC Classic 2 profile that you can get. It's a paid-for profile, but I'll show you some areas where you can get a free example of this. One of the areas I like it is that it actually comes with a 24-page report, and the back 12 pages actually go through all of the different types of profile that you can have, and they give you a lot of information about it. If it's your own profile, the first 12 pages are all about you, how what your profile means to you, the areas that you can improve in, and how you will react in different circumstances. So this one is a good profile of a high D, highly demanding person with a certain level of high I. So you'll notice that you're not just one profile or another, you're actually a range of profiles. And quite often your profile will be nuanced compared to this template profile that we've got here, which is why we typically do run the report on an individual by individual basis. But why it's useful to have this and the other 15 that are available is that you can get a good understanding of generally how other people work, and you can interpret from their actions, their behavior, the way in which they communicate, what their profile is. And other bits and hints you can get here is you notice that how they judge other people. So that can come over very quickly in the way in which they communicate. Also, how they behave under pressure. So in this case, becomes critical and fault-finding, resists participating in a team, and may overstep boundaries. So a highly demanding person could become quite insular and just make decisions by themselves. But the model that, as it gets pulled together, it doesn't cover one element, and that is maturity. And a maturity is essentially what you do with the information that you have. So you can use this model to understand how others are behaving, how you're behaving, so you can understand your own awareness of yourself, what are the key characteristics about what you do and what you don't do, what you like to do, what you don't like to do, and you can also identify that in others. But the maturity is what you then do with it. It's how you adapt. It's the behavior, the emotions, and the communication that you develop off the back of that. And highly developed, mature versions of the high D, a high I, a high S, and a high C are can have great benefits. So a high I, for instance, they can be, the downside is they can be very changeable. They can take on something and get distracted by twinkly lights in a matter of moments. And they're very good starters, but very poor completer finishers. And a strapline for them could be squirrel, because they get distracted at a moment's notice. In fact, they can be distracted by being distracted while being distracted. However, a highly mature high I is an absolute fantastic person in terms of program management, because what they can do is they can keep many different projects going at the same time. If their plate's spinning on a stick, they can keep them all spinning at the same time, and they can move from one plate to another plate with very little drag very little drag. So for instance, if it was me, I would moving from one project to another, I have to put down the project I was working on, I have to look at the next one, remind myself where I was, get back up to speed, and then get going again. High I's can just dance across many of these projects with very little downtime. High S's can make fantastic leaders, but they need to get over the perspective that actually, if it's going to be bad for the individual that this change is taking place, that actually in the greater good, both for the organization and in the longer term, medium to longer term, for this individual, it will be better. Then they are able to assist them the best way possible. In fact, they're probably the best out of all four profiles in being able to assist people through change and make sure that they're supported and that they come out at the end with that benefit that they're allowed to go through. So they can be an ideal person to have within your team when you're trying to bring about change. High C's can be very dogmatic and focused on detail. And it really can turn people off. People just don't understand them. They go into vast amounts of detail, which people can find frustrating. But the high C, when they're mature, can make detail accessible. They get better at editing down in terms of what's required. They become aware of the people around them and actually can edit that detail and what's required for the individual. High Ds, they become less psycho. They're much greater on the emotional development side and become better at working with people, but while still driving that charge and that change to be able to bring about grand ambitions and projects. Can your profile change over time? The answer is yes. This is my profile from 2010 and 2020. And actually, this reflected a period in time where I was working hands-on in tech in 2010. I was a team leader, and I've been taking on larger and larger projects for the organization. And then over time, over the next 10 years, I having completed my MBA, I took on larger projects. I started working internationally, working on mergers and acquisitions. I started taking on more senior positions and greater responsibility. And you can see over that time that my conscientious level, my detailed level dropped down, and I became more demanding. And this is gently changing over time as I was put into more demanding situations that had to happen against a timeline. And also you can see that my I level went up as well. So I became more and more interactive. My job became more people focused and more more objective focused, as opposed to having my being line of business and working on the actual deliverables of the organization. So it could be said I became less creative and I became more results driven as we went through. So there is high reliability behind the DISC model. What that means is if you took the model again today and you took it tomorrow and the day after and a month later, you would get the same result each time. And it's only over long periods of time, like say a decade, that you can see a slow drift and change in the way in which you work and the way in which you perceive what's going on, which is unlike other models. However, the validity of how this directly affects performance is low. And that's because the model on its own really just is informative. It's there as a tool. It's there to help you understand and to perceive what's going on around you, both of yourself and your team. It's then what you do with it that is important. So how can you find out what your profile is? Well, you could go read the book. It's available from all good bookstores and probably some bad ones as well. There is discpersonalitytesting.com that you can go to, and they do a free version of the test. You get limited results. There is a paid for version that goes into much more detail as well. But the one that I've been using and I use in all of my exec coaching is the classic DISC profile that's on discprofile.com. And you can go there. It costs $81. It is quite expensive, but the quality and the depth of the report, and then what you can actually do with it, it's immediately actionable. So maybe let's have a look at some case studies. So there's an engineer at a client's startup organization, and they've been creating an enterprise monolith app, a massive software application. They've been going for a year and it's still not being delivered. So would you like to make a guess as to what this person could be like? Which of these profiles? Do you want to drop in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and shout out? Do you think they're going to be a D, an I, a C, or an S? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Someone who's going to be absolutely detailed focus, not necessarily really listening to other people around them, maybe as well as they should do, more focused on task than on people. So if we have a look, you can see that that across the top, so on the quadrant on the right hand side, that the people the D's and the I's are more focused on change and bringing about what's going on, and they're going to be more focused on bringing about that change. The D's and the C's are more focused on task. The I's and the S's are more focused on people. So my guess here is that they're going to be either a D or a C. High D wants to get something done pretty much as fast as they possibly can, the shortest route between here and there. So I would suggest that this person is not a high D, which leads me to believe that they're a high C. High Cs need absolute detail. They quite often will create massive platforms or monoliths where they want to go in and understand all of the options and all of the possibilities that could actually be achieved. So my impression is that this person would be a high C, a highly conscientious person. And the question is, okay, what would you do with that? Well, it would depend which person's actually going to interact with them. A high D would probably get highly frustrated with the high C, and we'd want to know with them, well, why aren't you hitting your target? Why haven't you got this done yet? Why is it taking so long? And that could cause a lot of friction, particularly if they're not particularly mature in their approach or their emotional address to the individual concerned, to the engineer. A more mature person would sit down and say, it seems to be taking a long time. Why is that? And they're probably going to really quite detailed discussion about why the high C would describe why they're doing this and all the ins and outs. Then the high D can go to them and say, well, that's absolutely fantastic, but what's the target that you're actually supposed to be hitting? What are the objectives that you're trying to work from here? And then work through with the high C to actually understand, okay, well, why are we doing all of this? We've got a target as an organization. This is where the high D can work quite well in suggesting that this is a specific objective we're going to hit. This is the detail behind it. They'll interact well with the high C because they're able to talk in logical fashion, which again disarms a lot of the emotional baggage that high Cs see that the Is and Ss hold. And suggest, well, actually, if we need to hit this target, we need to be able to deliver this within 3 months, but it only needs to be able to achieve these 5 things. Whereas actually you're building something that can do these 20, these 30 things. They're great for phase 2. They're not going to be so good for phase 1. So we need to deprioritize them and focus on this deliverable here. And the reason that's important is because we need to get investment, or we need to be able to go and make sales, and we can't go to market until this is actually done. So again, the high D would use logic in their discussion with the high C. The high I interacting with a high C. High I would, first of all, would want to meet in person, and would probably try and drag the high C away from their desk, go and sit down somewhere that's a little bit more open, a little bit more sociable, and try and understand what more about them as an individual. So how's it going at home? What are your hobbies? How are you doing? So really trying to build that relationship with the high C to understand what's going on. High C could be quite insular, could be quite introverted if they're particularly extreme for their category. And so it might actually be that the high I has to be really quite gentle in achieving that. Those that aren't quite so mature could be a little bit more of a blunt instrument and could overwhelm the high C and actually find that they would retreat further. A more mature high I would interact, build that relationship slowly. Maybe it's not just going to be a single meeting. It's understanding and actually building that link between the two in a bridge. And then equally, but high Is are focused on targets and actually achieving change, and they can see the way over problems. So if the high C is sitting there saying, oh, well, I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and that's not working, and that's really hard, the high I will be able to sit there and sympathetically understand where they're up to, but also help them to step forward over the journey, over the obstacles that they're meeting. The challenge that a high I could have if they're not quite mature is that they could get bored. They would not, they want to have a quick interaction and to be able to move on, solve the problem and go. The more mature high I would have more patience and more consideration in terms of what they're doing, and may well not be able to do it themselves. However, they could go off and introduce someone else to help. So they're good at being able to delegate and bring in others. And that comes again from the social side of what they're doing. High S could actually find this quite challenging, particularly if they're not particularly mature, because they don't want to upset the high C. They understand that they've got their approach and that they're going through what they're doing, but it doesn't help the organization with the fact that actually it's building something that's far larger than is actually required, and that they actually need to hit a target now. And you can find that high S's that are not particularly mature or adaptive can go into paralysis. They just don't know how to proceed. They said, well, I had a chat with him, but it just didn't seem to work. And then they just stop. They don't go any further, and which can be really quite frustrating for the organization around them, particularly if they're a team leader. The more mature high S will have found a way that actually they'll be able to balance what's the longer term implication. If we don't get this product right, actually the business could go out of business. We could all lose our jobs. Equally, if we don't get this right, our customers are out there at the moment. They're crying out for some of this functionality that we haven't got, and if we don't produce this new version, then actually they're going to be disappointed. They're going to be logging more support calls. There's going to be our relationship with those customers is going to break down, and again, we could lose our existing business, let alone not actually create any new business. So they're able to bring this about, and the way that they do that is that, again, they're very good at building that relationship with the high C. But what they can do is they can be both sympathetic, but also understand with them that yes, the world is a horrible place, that it is really quite challenging, and that it is hard to get things done. But maybe we need to get it done because we actually need to hit this target. And actually, if we don't get this delivered in the next 2 months, that customer over there said that they're going to leave. And equally, if we don't hit our sales target, then actually going to start making some people redundant. And that's going to come from my team and quite possibly yours. So we really do need to be able to move this along. So they'll work on the motivation that's required from an environmental basis, but equally understanding that it's quite a challenging environment and they aren't necessarily capable of moving them through. So the way in which they can do this is the more high S that is mature usually finds that they started to develop more high D and high S capability, high I capabilities, normally high I. And that means that if they're either able to bring about that change themselves, or they're able to delegate and bring in collaborators to help the high C actually achieve what they need to achieve. So there's many different ways in which you can actually move through this. Is there any questions or queries that we've got there? If you want to drop off mute, if you've got any questions. Conscious that was quite a long chunk of time that we were talking through. The next section that we've got is the CEO or co-founder that you've got. So CEO could be of any size organization. It could be a large blue chip corporate, a mid-size organization, or maybe a co-founder for a startup or a scale-up organization. And it really can, you can get lots of different problems that come through here. And actually you get many different types of flavor of CEO and co-founder, and they won't necessarily be one specific bit. I mean, you can find a lot of high D people that are in there specifically because they're target focused. They know what they want to achieve and they're going to go and drive to go and get it. That said, many people start their own organizations for completely different reasons. It could be societal, that they want to be, it's going to be an organization for good. It could be the long-term benefit of themselves and society, but also to enrich themselves and organizations. Equally, they could be a professional leader come manager in a larger organization, and actually they've come into the role and the position to bring about change or achieve specific objectives. And the reason that there's usually a disconnect here is that there's the disconnect of perspective of maybe from senior leadership down into the organization, but never is that more acute than for the CEO or the co-founder, because literally the buck stops with them. If there is a decision to be made, the last person it gets escalated up to is the CEO. Now, quite often the best CEOs will have a support network around them. That's quite often what the board is for. There could be private equity investors or other similar sorts of venture capitalists or whoever they happen to be. Or it could well be their own personal framework and support network that they have around them of peers in other organizations. If we focus on the frustration that they need, sometimes I think you get some intransigence, or you find that they haven't they've made decisions, but it seems to have happened within a vacuum, and it just comes out of nowhere, and off they go, or they're running at a heck of a pace trying to get a lot done. What we can look at here is maybe a number of these. So a high I. So ironically, I'm actually working with a co-founder at the moment, and they are a high I. And the bit that people find frustrating around them is that they're trying to do everything at once. They've got about 20 different things all on the go, and maybe, as you know, for startup organizations, you really do need to focus on just a few things and get them right and get it moving in the right direction, and then you can add other things in as you come in. Equally, he seems to focus on one thing for it seems like minutes before he will then go on to something completely different, and that's the best thing since sliced bread, and we all need to focus around this. He's quite poor in terms of managing his time and managing the time of others around him, in that because he's flitting from one thing to another, when he tries to get something done, other people just aren't available. So he'll put meetings in the diary, and then, having put the meeting in the diary to sort of set the direction, he'll then go off and try and find out and get people to actually attend. He then finds that people can't attend, and therefore the meeting gets cancelled or pushed back. So again, this can be quite frustrating. So the way in which you can work with him is actually the people around him, his peers, the CTO, the COO, the chief financial officer, have all sat down with him and said, right, we need to be far clearer. And actually, we've led through the COO to understand, right, let's be very specific about what are the objectives we're trying to hit, what's the roadmap, what are the priorities that we're working to, and which order are they actually going to happen in. And let's focus around these. So what it's doing is providing the support for the CEO around the areas that he's not so strong on, while allowing him to go off and on the specific things that need the enthusiasm, that need the highly gregarious and interactive person who can get on well and build relationships super fast and make things happen. Keep them focused on that, while allowing those that are around them to actually work in a far clearer fashion. You've then got maybe the high Ds that are out there, the highly demanding. That's and the problem is, you maybe saw earlier on in that profile of a high D, that under pressure they can become insular. They will make decisions on their own, quite possibly in a vacuum. They will become quite surly and maybe distance themselves from the rest of the team. So if you see a highly demanding CEO, or high D CEO, you can look at them and understand from their behavior whether they are in that stress situation, and whether they're working in the way, or whether they're actually being far more collaborative. Now, because the buck stops with the CEO, and ultimately it can depend on the type of organization as well. So for instance, if you're in an organization that's got some investment behind it, either from venture capital, or private equity, quite often private equity companies will put their money in on the understanding that they're going to get a much greater amount of money back, maybe in only 2 or 3 or 4 years. They come in with their eye on the door, which they're going to go out. And that means there is a specific grand ambition that sits behind what the CEO needs to achieve. Quite often they need to achieve accelerated growth in that time frame. They may need to develop new capability really quite quickly. And it means that quite often the private equity companies will go for those highly demanding individuals, or quite possibly high Is, that can actually work in a fast-paced, active environment and can actually build those relationships with those that are around them. Where you find that it can fall down is where they outreach what they're going to do. Their reach outdoes their grasp, and this means that they're trying to get too much done, or they're trying to move faster than actually the organization around them has been able to achieve this. And again, it can take a strong intervention to actually achieve this. It may well be that their peers around them are able to do that. They may be trusted individuals within the organization that can do that. Quite often, though, you need to bring in a third party. A third party could be someone like Wayne, who's in the audience here, who can sit there as a confidant, as an exec coach, and actually talk them through where they're up to and the options that they have available to them, what's working well, where their strengths are, maybe where their weaknesses are, and again, just bring forward that self-awareness within the individual so that they can understand why they are in the situation that they are at the moment and help them understand and move in a direction where they can actually bring about a resolution. So very much a coaching mindset as they step forward. This person could be the chairman of the board. More often than not, one of the strongest and main reasons that the chairman is in place is not only are they the bridge into the investment community and maybe the regulatory environment, depending what industry they're in, they're also there as the support mechanism in for the CEO. And more often than not, they're quite capable in being able to achieve this and go through a very similar role as an external third party would, such as an exec coach. Has anyone got any questions or queries there? Maybe a different aspect of CEO or co-founder that you find quite frustrating or demanding or disruptive to what you're doing? No. So yeah, the disruptive element there is that they can make decisions really quite quickly, choose a direction, and it catches a lot of people by surprise. And suddenly the world has changed. It's upside down since it was yesterday, and everything has realigned, and we're moving quite quickly. And that can be really quite disruptive and traumatic for some people, particularly high C's and high S's that have planned their world out and know what's going to happen. And suddenly that uncertainty can cause a massive disruption for them, and they can become highly unproductive as they try and just process what's going on without them, around them. High eyes, love it. It's a great amount of change. We're doing something completely different. I don't actually need to finish off all of those things that I promised that I never actually got finished. But so they think it's absolutely wonderful that it's changed, and they'll focus and they'll make the switch really quite quickly. As indeed will the high Ds will either, the rest of the other high Ds within the organization will either resist and be intransigent completely, or get on board and actually drive through quite quickly. So there are other examples that are out there, and I'm not going to dip into these now, but I'm happy to have discussions afterwards or maybe in the Q&A when we get to them. There's a great example I had with a pre-sales leader that I was working with was in conflict with a delivery manager, and the pre-sales manager was a high I and the delivery manager was a high C. And the high I just didn't have the patience to sit down and actually provide the information that the delivery manager required. And the delivery manager just put the blockers in place because there was this flighty person that kept on changing his mind and wanting to do different things and never had all of the detail that was required. And you can see this coming out in various other things, like accounts team not signing off new suppliers because they've got their process and you absolutely need to follow it through come what may, and there's no way that we will place an order unless you've filled out all the paperwork. Frustrated and hostile customer lead. This was a rescue that I had to go into to bring around with the customer. And there was a stupid tax. So anytime there was a disruption to his business because our organization had or hadn't done something it was supposed to, there was a 20 grand deficit that we paid. We would pay them 20 grand every time there was a problem. So which really focuses the mind to make sure that you don't do things wrong. But actually bringing him round so that he was a great supporter and a great advocate of the organization was directly applicable and off the back of this DISC profile. So to summarize, it's very much around your awareness, and you can use the DISC model to actually increase your own self-awareness and your awareness of the people around you, how you perceive them, how they perceive the world and the way in which they operate. But from that, from the reports and from your own experience, you can adapt the way in which you work. You can be aware of the strengths that you have that you can bring to a situation. Equally, you can understand what areas that you're maybe not so strong on or could actually damage a situation or make it less good. Equally, you can see that within teams as well, and within others. Understanding their profile means that you can have a shorthand to communicate with them, understand how you will approach them. If it's a high C, they're going to need more detail, more logic. If it's a high I, they're probably going to need things brought down into bite-sized chunks. It's going to be very much about the relationship and emotion, and they not really interested in facts unless it's a really good, fun, stupid fact. It's then, with that adaptation, maturing your approach, and whether that's going to be how you behave, how you communicate, and the way in which you deal with your own emotions and their emotions, and that leads on to greater performance. What I provide off the back of this is some specific coaching around the DISC approach and how you can take that self-awareness and awareness of others and go through that adaptation. Quite often it could be for a rescue, it could be for a turnaround, maybe you're new to a leadership position, or it could just be that you're in a position that doesn't seem to be working and communication has broken down. So it's available both for individuals, but also workshops for wider people, and equally for workshops for wider people with follow-on coaching sessions so that they can work through each of their individual problems or the challenges that they're experiencing. So does anyone have any questions? We've got 10 minutes to go. So Sebastian, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, can come in. Yeah, Nick, thank you very much for the presentation. Over the years, I've seen very similar models which kind of split people in 4, 3, or 5 categories. And I did myself questionnaire in previous jobs. And I think that they're all good somehow. It can help you to map people in big groups. I never read this book yet so far. So the question is kind of, do you think that this is the tool to use, or it's just a tool that can be used for a period of time, then switch to another one, then switch to another? What are your views based on what?
I've looked at many tools, and I used to use Myers-Briggs type indicator beforehand. I know there's NEO, there's various others, there's personality tests as well as behavioral. And actually I focused around this one, and I've been using it consistently now for over 15 years. I've used it with each of the teams that I've built and all of my direct reports, and more often than not, I've cascaded it down within the organizations. And quite often, because I've been brought in for a rescue turnaround, and actually the team appears to be quite dysfunctional, but actually they just need the right support in the right places. So no, I would say this is a long-term tool that you can use. It is a tool though. You're not going to get high performance just because you did the report and you happen to read through it. It's what you do with that information. It's what you do with that awareness, and both of the awareness of yourself and of others that are around you. So I would say it's a tool for life, not just for Christmas. Any other questions or queries? Wayne, I know you've used different tools in the past and had an experience of this. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, Nick, you're right. Like you, I have used different tools, and DISC is also the one that I gravitate to, and I regard it as a connections tool, not as a binary reflection of somebody's personality or their DNA. And I often have debates with people who think of this as a test, some kind of grading system, notably high Ds. In sales in particular, they will want to be high D. They have an idea of their personal image that they want to portray. And they are often the ones who will try to game the test. They'll try and figure out, well, how do I come out of this red? I'm red. Yeah. And it really isn't the point. It's a connections tool. And Nick, the thing that I wanted to build on what you shared, all of which is fantastic material that I recognize and use. I apply this in the world of sales most often, whether it's with founders who are in sales or salespeople. In a sales situation, where they're trying to figure out what is the impact of my next step likely to be on my prospect or my customer.
Mm-hmm.
How might they respond in this situation? And how might I adapt my approach to make the strongest connection? So again, not about right or wrong,
mm-hmm.
But about judgment. And I love your use of the word maturity, Nick. It's not the right answer. It's about what information can we make available? How do we interpret it? What decisions then do we make as a result? And then how do we adapt once we get there? So maturity, I think, is a great word to include.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Wayne. Adrian?
Hi, so thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to ask if you can share a few words on Holly's question in the chat about what you do if you have several high Ds in a room. And so, yeah, thank you. That's it.
So yeah, 2 high Ds in the room who aren't necessarily getting on. It was quite interesting that I actually had this situation in one of the teams, and actually it was a turnaround. And we the chap who was a high I that was leading this particular team made sure that the high D sat next door to him, so that he could listen into the way in which he communicated, because this guy was a super high D, and he was like mid-level within the organization. Excuse me. And he could be really quite blunt, and he wasn't particularly aware in how blunt that he was actually being when he was speaking with people. And we were able to work with him and sort of take the edge off where he was up to. He worked through that awareness and was able to understand the different types of people who were frustrating him, who came towards him, why they were communicating in the way that they did, and why they were looking for information in the way that they did, and why they asked him questions in the way that they did. However, 2 high Ds being super productive and getting stuff done can sound like a stand-up fight. You almost think that these people are going to throw punches any given moment, but actually, if you were to speak to them afterwards, they say, no, that was super productive. We got so much done in such a short period of time. So it can be, one, quite scary, but also quite funny at the same time. In terms of trying to get 2 high Ds to work together, quite often you will find they will naturally work together because they are sympathetic in terms of their outlook, the way in which they behave, and what they're trying to achieve. What can be where there can be divergence is where they've got different priorities, or actually their understanding of what the ultimate goal is not completely shared. So they're not collaborating. They're working at odds or against, in conflict with each other. Quite often you're going to need probably the high D with the greatest maturity out of those 2 needs to be the one that steps forward to bring that forward, and that they may not necessarily be the one that is the most senior within the organization when they do that. So it's so I suppose the question would be for you, and Holly's not here so we can't ask her, but are you thinking of 2 high Ds where you're not one of the high Ds? Or are you thinking of it from where you are one of the high Ds?
A little bit both. So the context was sort of who ends up in an executive team. It's typically people that have a strong D or a high D, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, which I posted sort of in the chat at the beginning, in the other chat, was, how do you survive there while not losing your connection to the people, right? There's this metaphor of the talented jerk or the ingenious jerk, right? And there's like, you have to be a strong driver. You have to not care about the people in order to succeed. And I wonder whether there's a balance about this, right? To be a good leader in the sense of people person, but also, survive with the wolves. Yeah.
So it really does depend on the people that are around them and the individual concerned, and indeed the circumstances that they're going through. It can all be unique. I've worked for an organization where one of the leaders was a super high D and super high C at the same time, and it used to drive a lot of people nuts around them, and it was very frustrating in terms of the way in which they were working. Ultimately, it was the support crew, the team that sat around them. There was a high I that was their advisor. and had the trusted ear of the CEO, and was able to take the temperature of the room and the organization around them and bring that back to play. And actually, they were a great facilitator throughout the organization in pulling out where there were areas of conflict and being able to go in almost as a fixer, a very high and mature high I and high D at the same time, having run their own business. So they had great legitimacy to come to bear in that situation. If the problem you can get is if there is no support structure around them, sometimes it can be just helping people deal with the aftermath, but also trying to have greater self-awareness of this ID. Why is this person working the way that they do? What can you do to communicate with them to help take the edges off what they're doing? And just to gently be able to give them feedback to say, when you do this, it makes that happen. Can we try and do something different so that doesn't happen? Or can we do this? So there's a very gentle feedback loop that you can bring in place. You should be super careful about trying to give feedback up through the hierarchy. Unless you've got a strong relationship in place already that you can use as a foundation for that, it may not go in your favor. It may well be that actually you should go and have a gentle and quiet, maybe a confidential word with one of their peers or someone else more senior in the organization to say, look, there's a problem here. That person, if they are well placed and mature, will also be able to turn around and say, and maybe support you if in the way in which you approach the situation and the way in which you could adapt, but equally will be able to then take it up within the organization to help that specific ID adapt within their situation. Sometimes, though, it doesn't work, or there isn't sufficient time, or there isn't sufficient support structure around it, and actually it can end up with some people leaving the business. And I've been in businesses and seen others in businesses where there's a super high D in place, and actually the half-life of people come up to the point where they're a direct report, and they last about 3 to 6 months and then they leave. The problem you can find at that point is the people that get there and stick, who are able to deal with that person, can be of a certain personality, and you can end up with groupthink that sits around it. So it can become quite dysfunctional. And that's where you can get into a situation, which I think was one of the other comments, where you've got a bullying or overbearing and quite an environment with a great lack of maturity in it, and that's there's very little sympathy or emotional intelligence that's in the room, and typically people will leave that organization. I'm conscious that we're just over our hour. Thank you all very much.
I want to thank you very much for sharing that.
Absolute pleasure, and happy to pick up the conversation afterwards. And indeed, if anyone's got any questions or queries, please do give me a shout, and yeah, happy to have a chat.
Thanks, Nick. That's good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.